You think Tinder is wild? You think modern dating is messy, unpredictable, maybe a little chaotic? Oh, buddy, you haven't seen anything yet. Because what if I told you that 1,000 years ago, people were getting tied into sacks, sharing beds with strangers, cooking up bull testicles for dinner, and, get this, having sex in front of their entire wedding party? Yeah, medieval folks weren't just into weird stuff. They practically invented it. And by the time we reach the end of this story, you'll realize that what we call the Dark Ages had a whole lot more to do with what people were doing in bed than what they were reading in church. Stick around, because the ending of this story is so outrageously unbelievable. You'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about medieval morals. Let's kick things off with one of the strangest, most awkward, and downright baffling mating rituals in human history, bundling.so. Here's the scene. You're a young guy in a small medieval village. Your parents set you up with someone they think might be your future wife. You think, cool, time for some wine, maybe a candlelit stroll, maybe romance. Nope, you get shoved into a bed, in full clothing, wrapped up like a human burrito in a sack, right next to your potential bride. Welcome to bundling, the medieval version of a supervised sleepover, except somehow even more uncomfortable. Sometimes, they'd go the extra mile and place a wooden board between the two of you, just to make sure nobody got too frisky. Nothing sets the mood like a big OL plank of hardwood wedged between your bodies. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just tolerated by the adults. It was encouraged. Parents would invite the guy over and literally prepare the bed for him to sleep, next to their daughter. Because in their minds, bundling was a cute, harmless way for young couples to bond without doing anything naughty. Yeah. Medieval parenting was wild that it got so common that they actually manufactured bundling bags. A whole cottage industry developed around crafting the perfect sleep sack to keep hormone-fueled teenagers morally upright. The irony is almost too rich to handle. And did it work? Absolutely not. Historical records show that pregnancy rates among bundled couples were higher than those who courted the old-fashioned way. Who would have guessed that cramming two young people into bed together might not be the most effective abstinence strategy? Everyone, apparently, except for medieval parents, church leaders, of course, hated it. They wrote furious sermons about how bundling was immoral, dangerous, and led to sin. But here's the twist. They couldn't do anything about it. The practice was so deeply baked into rural tradition that even priests couldn't get the people to stop. It's kind of like modern parents trying to ban smartphones. They can try, but good luck actually enforcing it. Now let's talk about food. Because if you thought aphrodisiacs were just oysters and chocolate, oh, you sweet summer child. In the Middle Ages, food was weaponized for lust. Forget strawberries and champagne. Try this instead, young bull testicles. That was the medieval go-to for getting people in the mood. They didn't even call them testicles, they called them stones, because apparently, saying balls was just a little too uncouth. Even if you were shoving them in a roasting pan, they roasted them, boiled them, fried them, ground them up, and stirred them into wine. If there was a way to cook animal testicles, medieval chefs were on it like Michelin-starred perverts. And the delicacies didn't stop there. They also believed sparrow brains could boost sexual performance. Why? No one knows. Maybe they thought tiny birds had big libidos. They also loved whipping up dishes from the genitals of rams, boars, and deer, because if you eat fertility, maybe you become fertility. That was the logic. Sympathetic magic. With a side of organ meat, spices weren't just for flavor, either. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, saffron, they were considered potent aphrodisiacs. That's partly why spices were so valuable back then. Forget gold. Forget land. Medieval nobles were out there paying fortunes for what was basically edible Viagra. And this wasn't just some underground kink. This was mainstream. Nobles threw entire feasts dedicated to stoking sexual energy. Picture a royal banquet where every dish is scientifically or superstitiously designed to make you want to rip off your tunic. And it wasn't just nobles. Doctors and priests wrote about this stuff. Real, published treatises with names like On the Generation of Semen and Foods That Arouse Lust. These weren't joke pamphlets. They were actual medical documents used by scholars. The line between dinner and foreplay in medieval times was basically non-existent. Weddings? Oh, those were full-on sensual buffets. The wedding cake often included honey, almonds, pine nuts, not for taste, but because those were known to stimulate the loins. Some weddings ended with guests giving the couple recipes, not advice. You think modern weddings are awkward when your uncle gives a cringy speech? Try opening a scroll of medieval aphrodisiac tips at the reception. Here's the wildest part. During religious fasting periods, certain foods were actually banned, not because they were too rich or fancy, but because they were thought to be too sexy. Like, sorry, Brother Thomas, no saffron stew for you this week. It might give you unholy thoughts. So yeah, medieval people didn't just believe food was love. They believed food was foreplay. And if you thought all that was extreme, we're just getting warmed up. Because next up is a tradition so public, so awkward, so wildly humiliating, that it makes the idea of your wedding night look like a picnic in comparison. Imagine this. Your wedding ends. You and your new spouse are led, escorted to your bedroom by your parents, in-laws, your priest, and half the nobility in town. You don't just get married. You're expected to perform in front of witnesses, because consummating your marriage wasn't just a private moment. It was a legal requirement, and someone had to confirm it happened. Yeah? Buckle up. So, you're freshly married, standing at the edge of your new bed with your bride. And no, this isn't the part where you gently close the door, light a few candles, and have your private newlywed moment. This is the part where your family and half the aristocracy are standing in the room with you, watching. Because in the Middle Ages, marriages weren't truly official until they were consummated, in front of witnesses. That's right. It wasn't enough to say your vows or sign a contract. You had to prove the deal was sealed, literally. And that meant getting naked, getting into bed, and getting busy, while your wedding guests stood around and observed. Now, this wasn't just some fringe royal tradition. This was common in any marriage where land, wealth, or political alliances were involved. Which means thousands of medieval couples had their wedding night turned into a live performance. It started with a procession. Guests would lead the newlyweds to the bedchamber, often playing music or singing as if they were sending the couple off to war. Once there, male relatives undressed the groom. Female relatives undressed the bride, because nothing says romance like a gender-segregated strip show orchestrated by your in-laws. Then came the moment of truth. The bride and groom were placed in bed together while everyone watched. Not peeked. Watched. Full-on, extended observation. Some witnesses even offered tips or encouragement, like medieval sex coaches. And if you're wondering, surely they didn't just stand there the whole time? Oh, they absolutely did. Sometimes, they didn't even leave afterward. They stayed to examine the sheets. Because blood was expected, proof of the bride's virginity, proof that intercourse actually happened. You had to present your bed linens like evidence in court. Because you were in court, essentially, even worse. If the consummation wasn't witnessed or documented properly, the marriage could be annulled, which meant starting over. Another wedding, another public performance, and yes, another full audience. Some couples tried to game the system, claiming they'd consummated in private or asking the witnesses to wait outside. Sometimes it worked, but other times, the courts threw it out. Not enough evidence. Do it again, the judges would say. And this time we watch. There were even etiquette manuals about this. Rules for where guests should stand, what they should say, when it was appropriate to clap. Kidding, mostly. Medieval society turned voyeurism into a protocol. But don't worry, the weirdness doesn't stop there. Because medieval people didn't just have sex, they scheduled it. With astrologers, priests, physicians. Like planning a tax audit crossed with a fertility ritual, we're talking about a level of detail and superstition that makes modern fertility tracking apps look lazy. Want to get pregnant? Cool. First, check the moon phase. Then consult your humoral balance. Hot or cold? Wet or dry? Are Venus and Mars in alignment? Are you facing the right direction? Is the weather warm enough? Has your priest signed off on your conception calendar? You'd think they were launching a space shuttle, not trying to make a baby. According to the medical wisdom of the day, the best time to conceive was during a waxing moon, around midnight, in a warm, humid room, facing east toward the sunrise, preferably while saying a prayer to a relevant saint. Extra points if it's a feast day, because some saints apparently helped boost virility. Saint Valentine wasn't just about candy hearts. The goal was to align the stars, the weather, the woman's bodily fluids, and the blessings of God, just to try and conceive a child. And that's not even the strangest part, because when it came to choosing the baby's gender, things got truly unhinged. Want a boy? Tie off the left testicle. Yes, seriously, medieval people believed that boys came from the right testicle and girls from the left. So if you cut off the left side of the factory, boom, problem solved. They even believed geography mattered. Couples would travel to different cities or regions just to have sex in a more fertile place, like a destination conception vacation, only without room service and with way more superstition. All of this was under constant pressure from the church, which, surprise, had a lot of opinions about when it was appropriate to have sex. The no-go list was insane. No sex on Sundays, or Fridays, or Wednesdays. No sex during Lent, during Advent, during pregnancy, menstruation, or breastfeeding. And absolutely no sex on saint days, fast days, or any of the 183 other days where sex was spiritually inappropriate. The church had effectively declared half the calendar off limits. So what did wealthy couples do? They hired specialists, people who combined astrology, medicine, and religious knowledge into one big fertility service. These medieval consultants would analyze everything, from your birth charts to your physical health to your confessional records, and then hand you a scroll that said, "You may now attempt conception on the 17th of June, between 11:57 p.m. and 12:14 a.m., while facing northeast on a feather mattress." And yes, people followed it. Because producing an heir wasn't just important, it was everything. Political alliances, inheritance, your entire legacy rested on getting it right. So if someone told you that only diamonds in your shoes would help you conceive a daughter, you wore diamonds in your damn shoes. But for some medieval folks, sex wasn't about timing or planning. It was about tools, magical tools. We're talking fertility belts, enchanted jewelry, and yes, blessed underwear. Let's start with the girdle of Venus. No, that's not a romantic nickname. That was a literal belt, made of linen or silk, sometimes embroidered with gold thread, sometimes inscribed with prayers or astrological symbols. It was worn around the hips and believed to enhance fertility, protect from miscarriage, and improve sexual performance. Basically, a medieval Fitbit for your uterus. But why stop at belts? Women also wore amulets, tiny pouches holding everything from powdered unicorn horn, reed, narwhal tusk, to crushed gemstones to written prayers. Because apparently, God appreciated a well-labeled wish list. Then there were the infamous conception stones, small rocks or crystals that women would tuck into their undergarments during sex, believing they could influence the child's gender. Emeralds were supposed to give you boys, sapphires for girls, diamonds for twins. It was like fantasy football, but for uteruses. Men weren't left out either. They had enchanted rings, blessed loincloths, even amulets containing, you guessed it, animal testicles. Because if medieval people were consistent about one thing, it was their obsession with testicles. The church? Oh, they got involved. Priests would bless belts, sanctify bedsheets, consecrate magical underwear, sometimes for a fee. It was like a subscription service for your sex life, except instead of push notifications, you got incense and Latin chanting. And here's the wildest part. We have manuals for this stuff. Literal instruction guides. How to wear your fertility belt. What to say while putting on your blessed underpants. What to do if your magical crotch charm stops working. Like tech support for sex accessories. Wealthy families had the real deal gear, imported silks, gemstones, custom embroidery. The poor made DIY versions with local herbs, leather scraps, and whatever shiny rocks they could find, which basically turned medieval fertility into a fashion class system. And if that sounds like peak absurdity, oh, we're not done yet. Because in part 3, we're diving into the darkest, most humiliating, most unbelievably public sex trials in human history. Imagine being forced to prove, in court, that your partner can't get it up, while medical experts and random strangers watch through peepholes. Yeah, it's about to get real weird. So, imagine this. Your marriage isn't working out. But remember, this is the Middle Ages. There's no easy divorce. No therapist. No prenup. The church says marriage is forever, unless your husband has one very specific problem that he can't perform. That's right. Impotence was one of the only legal grounds a woman could use to get out of a marriage. But proving it? Oh, proving it meant taking things to an entirely new level of humiliating madness. Welcome to the medieval impotence trials, a legal circus where your sex life became a courtroom drama and dignity. Yeah, that got tossed out the window on day one. On IT, all started with a complaint. A woman would tell the church courts, "Hey, my husband can't, function." The court would respond, not with sympathy, but with a full-scale investigation. First, both parties were examined, physically. Doctors, midwives, priests. They'd inspect the husband's genitals for abnormalities. The wife would also be examined to make sure she was receptive, meaning, yep, her body was ready and willing. Then came the questioning. How often did you try? What exactly happened? What didn't happen? They wanted details. Clinical, personal, humiliating. But if the court still wasn't convinced, they ordered what might be the most insane legal proceeding in history, the trial by Congress. This was not metaphorical. It meant the couple had to attempt sex under supervision, sometimes in a courthouse, sometimes in a specially prepared chamber, always under the watchful eyes of doctors, clergy, or court officials, peering through peepholes or hiding behind screens. The couple was given a specific time limit to complete the deed. If the man failed to produce an erection or failed to maintain it, the marriage could be annulled. But it wasn't always that simple. Some courts required multiple attempts. Yes, some couples had to try over and over again, all while being watched, judged, and written about in legal documents. And guess what? Some men tried to cheat. They'd smuggle in aphrodisiacs, herbs, potions, sometimes even magical amulets, in hopes of boosting performance. There are actual court records of men being caught hiding these items, leading to additional body inspections to make sure they weren't cheating. For the women, it wasn't much better. They had to prove they were sexually enthusiastic enough to make their husbands aroused. If a man failed to perform, it could be blamed on her. Maybe she wasn't attractive enough. Maybe she wasn't receptive. Some women were grilled on whether they properly aroused their husband before intercourse, as if seduction was now part of legal due process. These trials could drag on for months, even years, with endless hearings and public speculation. And no matter the outcome, everyone talked. Your neighbors, your church, the entire town. Once your sex life was dragged into the open, you couldn't put it back in the box. Some men, faced with the public shame of trial, just surrendered. They accepted annulment, publicly admitting impotence, just to escape the horror of legal sex theater. And in doing so, they became social pariahs. No woman would want to marry a man who'd officially failed in bed. But wait, it gets even more twisted. Because while the church was busy running sex trials and condemning bundling and banning aphrodisiac foods, they were also running Europe's biggest sex trafficking ring. Yeah, let that sink in. 12th century London, the District of Southwark was home to 18 licensed brothels. And who owned the land those brothels sat on? The Bishop of Winchester. That's right, the church. The very institution preaching chastity, purity, and virtue was collecting rent from brothel keepers. Officially, the church couldn't condone prostitution. Unofficially, they were raking in huge profits, and their justification, prostitution, they argued, was a lesser evil. Better to let men visit brothels than risk worse sins: rape, adultery, homosexuality. So, instead of shutting down the trade, they regulated it. Like a medieval government with a moral loophole, prostitutes had to wear specific clothing, work only during certain hours, live in designated zones, and even submit to medical exams. They couldn't refuse customers without cause. And, of course, they paid rent to brothel keepers, who paid landlords, who paid taxes. To the church. It was a hierarchy, a pyramid scheme built on sin, with bishops sitting comfortably at the top. And the hypocrisy gets worse, because the money collected from sex work, it wasn't hidden. It was used to fund monasteries, build cathedrals, pay for religious festivals. Entire spiritual institutions were funded, at least in part, by the literal wages of sin. And when reformers tried to shut it all down, guess who resisted? Everyone. Church leaders, secular authorities, even local governments. The system made too much money to stop. And for centuries, it continued. until the Protestant Reformation finally made the hypocrisy too public, too obvious, too unholy to ignore. And if all that wasn't enough madness for one civilization, we still haven't talked about birth control. Or, more accurately, the dangerous, delusional nonsense medieval people believed about how not to get pregnant. Let's start with their favorite solution: animal testicles. Again, because in the Middle Ages, everything seemed to start and end with genitals. Women wore pouches with weasel testicles around their necks, believing this would block conception. The logic? Weasels were sexually active but had small litters, so their anatomy must contain fertility secrets. But it didn't stop there. People drank all kinds of questionable potions, ground up beaver testicles, dissolved iron, mercury. Yes, mercury. The literal poison. Women poisoned themselves trying to avoid pregnancy. And tragically, in some cases, it worked, because dead people can't get pregnant. Then there was the sneezing method. Some doctors claimed that if a woman sneezed immediately after sex, it would force the semen out. Women would keep pepper or herbs nearby to induce sneezing as fast as possible. It's absurd, but it shows just how desperate they were. Physical barriers weren't any better. Some women used honey-soaked wool or crocodile dung. Yes, dung, as makeshift contraceptives. One method involved inserting half a lemon like a cervical cap. Believe it or not, the acidity might have had some contraceptive effect, but the discomfort probably ruined the moment. And let's not forget the timing method, which was completely backwards. Medieval science believed women were most fertile during menstruation and least fertile mid-cycle. Exactly the opposite of what we know today. So people trying to avoid pregnancy often had sex at the most fertile times without even realizing it. There were magical methods, too. Women wore amulets inscribed with spells, buried herbs during full moons, or recited prayers while walking backwards around churches. Because apparently, if you confused God hard enough, he might forget to make you pregnant. Even the withdrawal method, one of the few methods that can actually work, was frowned upon. Medieval doctors claimed it could lead to madness, blindness, or death for the man. So even when people stumbled onto something effective, fear and bad science stopped them. So here's the thing. When you pull back and look at the big picture, medieval people weren't just weird about sex. They were obsessed. They were terrified of it, fascinated by it, controlled by it. They bundled teenagers in bed with wooden boards between them. They hosted feasts of animal testicles and sparrow brains. They performed wedding night sex in front of a live audience. They tied off testicles to choose baby genders. They blessed magical underwear. They watched people have court-mandated sex. They funded churches with brothel money. And they used crocodile poop as contraception. And all of this, the awkwardness, the rituals, the madness, tells us something timeless. When people are desperate enough, they will believe anything. Try anything. Eat anything. Wear anything. Watch anything. And in the Middle Ages, they did all of the above. If you thought the Dark Ages were boring, think again. And if you're still here after all of that, you, my friend, are officially immune to historical culture shock. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, because the next story gets even stranger to get real weird.